Hello and welcome. You're listening to Oath and Staff, a podcast about human stories from people of medicine. I am A. David Singh, your host, former neurosurgeon, and author of Magical Rome Universe. When I'm on this podcast of writing fiction, I explore the same themes: service mindedness, overcoming challenges in a complex world, and how our choices shape who we become. These themes come shining through in today's guest, Dr. Ulrika Sandvik, a neurosurgeon at Karolinska University Hospital and Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. If that sounds familiar to you, that's because the prestigious Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine is awarded by the Nobel Assembly at Karolinska Institute every year. Born and raised on a farm in rural Ostrobothnia, Finland, Ulrika had no academic role models at home, so she embraced the values of grit, optimism, and curiosity from an early age. And that mindset played a pivotal role in her becoming a neurosurgeon. While being a neurosurgeon is awe inspiring in itself, it happens to be just the beginning of Ulrika's calling. She is actively involved in philanthropic work in Western Africa, serves on ethics boards in European medical societies, and the latest adventure took her all the way to the southern tip of our planet, where she served as the medical officer of an Antarctic expedition. Today, I'm delighted to invite Ulrika on the Oath and Staff podcast, where you will hear all about how she serves humankind while leading a life of challenge and adventure. Welcome, Ulrika. Welcome to Oath and Staff.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. It's really an honor and pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is on mine. Ulrika, you grew up on a farm in rural Finland with no academic models in your family. Yet you went on to become a neurosurgeon at one of the most celebrated medical institutions in the world, the Karolinska. That is such a remarkable journey. Will you take us back to the very beginning? What's the story behind how you got interested in pursuing medicine as a career and then later stepping into the physically and emotionally demanding world of neurosurgery?
It's not really anything I ever thought of doing. If somebody would have told me when I was a small girl, you'll be going into medicine, you'll become a doctor, I wouldn't have believed it. I was, as you said, born up on a farm. The village had at the time 11 people. It's 10 kilometers from the closest village, and there wasn't much to do. And I was a clumsy child, so sports was not for me. But my parents saw my interest in books, and they got me a lot of books. They got me encyclopedias. This area has got good library coverage, and that meant that there were two smaller libraries as well as a library bus. And this library bus came specifically for me and my grandma twice a month. The driver and librarian, he was a wonderful person who he really took the interest of getting all kinds of books for me. One week it was geology, next week it was adventure books, and it was just such a beautiful journey into reading and discovering the world that way. And eventually, when I started going to high school, we got to visit the University Library in Helsinki, the capital of Finland. And I remember just walking around there and thinking, if I was able to study at the university. And luckily, I had some great role models at school. One of the youngest teachers, she was a teacher in English and Finnish. She's nowadays a good friend of mine, Pia. She was kind of inspiring role model who had seen the world. She had lived in Canada. She was confident, brave. She introduced me to a lot of literature, and seeing the world occasionally through her eyes made me really, really inspired. And I started thinking about doing psychology, and eventually I was encouraged to go into psychiatry. And that's why I applied to medical school. And one thing led to another. I realized psychiatry would be for me, and I was thinking about orthopedics, and eventually I kind of ended up in neurosurgery because there was nothing as interesting as neurosurgery, but it was never a straight path.
I believe that most of us who take up medicine do get interested in books, both storybooks and non-fiction books, right from an early age, like you stated. So, when you were a medical student or when you were a trainee in neurosurgery, did you have a favorite teacher or mentor? Tell us the story how they influenced your career.
Um, in neurosurgery, I was working with a lot of strong personalities. I suppose that's always been the situation in neurosurgery. There are a lot of people who are really, really focused on what they do. I was very fortunate to be working with many lovely people. And among those, I think my professor, Tommy Bergenheim, who is a professor in neurosurgery in Umeå, where I did my residency, he's this kind of wonderful person. He's got so much knowledge. He's traveled the world. He's interested in culture, and he's got so much joy in his life. And I always found it very inspiring to have people around me who were extremely skilled at their work, extremely smart, but also had this idea that life can't just be about work, and that there are many other dimensions in our existence, such as culture, such as music, such as experiences. And I think that's just something that stayed with me the whole time.
I believe you do have a lot of cultural activities going on in your own life, which we will talk about a little later in this episode. So, for now, if I may stick to neurosurgery, I have another question for you. You went on to subspecialize in pediatric neurosurgery and epilepsy surgery. I spent years as a neurosurgeon myself, but I worked primarily on adult brains. Operating on a child's brain is a different world altogether. Their brains are still developing, forming connections, discovering what they are capable of. Ulrika, will you tell our viewers and listeners what makes pediatric neurosurgery so demanding and so deeply rewarding for you?
I think that in pediatric neurosurgery, there's such a variation. You have the whole age perspective of the neonate, the prematurely born kids that are maybe 500 grams, they could fit in your palm. And then you got the teenagers who are nearly adults. And you also have got all the diagnosis from simple, maybe skull bone tumors or straightforward surgeries. And you got the extremely complicated tumors that unfortunately happen in pediatric population. And that together with the fact that you're dealing with a growing individual who's got hopefully the whole life in front of them, and you have to be really, really cautious about how you handle them, not only physically in surgery, but also mentally, because this will be huge trauma, huge bad experience for them if you do something wrong to them in early on. I'm really touched with the trust that I'm given by the parents who might be meeting me for an appointment one or two times, and they trust me to do whatever is in my power to do in order to help their child. It's always a beautiful experience to build this relationship with the family. So there are many aspects of both emotional, pedagogical, as well as surgical challenges in working with pediatric neurosurgery.
Yes, that's a remarkable insight. I can certainly appreciate what you're sharing with us. Thank you for that. Now, let's talk about the other aspect of neurosurgery that you're proficient in, epilepsy surgery. That happens to be one of the most technically challenging areas of neurosurgery. It is not as simple as removing a tumor or draining blood clots from the brain. In your work, you are mapping the brain, hunting for the epileptic focus, and then removing or disconnecting it, while preserving the normal functioning of the adjacent areas of the brain, like memory, language, motor functions, and even personality. Ulrika, will you tell us in simple terms what are the different types of epilepsy surgeries, and if possible, share a short story about a patient whose life was transformed by this procedure.
Epilepsy is such a complex disease, and one of the problems is that it's not always located in one area of the brain. The whole brain can be involved, or networks of the brain can be involved, and it's a big puzzle to try to figure out which area is responsible for the epileptic disease and how we should treat it. And it is really, really a matter of teamwork. I've been so fortunate to be able to work with a lot of very skilled colleagues. We have our epilepsy rounds every 2 weeks. We sit down, we discuss these patients. I bring my case to the table. The neurophysiologists describe the electrical activity in the brain, the networks that might be involved. The neurologists tell their side, the psychologists tell their side, and the epilepsy nurses bring their insight. And it's a team of 20 people who discuss each an individual patient. It's hundreds of hours of work. And it's so fulfilling when we get a reasonable hypothesis, we can propose a surgery. And of course, then discuss with the patient and the family the pros and cons of the surgery, the risks and the opportunities. And if you are able to do a surgery which alleviates or completely eradicates the epilepsy, it's just so wonderful to see. Throughout the years, I've had the opportunity to see a good few cases where we had good results, especially since we started introducing laser ablations, which is a kind of minimal invasive technique where you put in a thin catheter into the brain and you heat up a certain part of the brain, which means that you can do pretty advanced surgery through a little small burhole. And the patient can go home the following day. They have less risks for complications and also a quicker recovery. Have really made a big difference in many patients' lives. And I kind of have two examples where we recently did a laser ablation on a quite small girl. She was having 50 to 70 seizures a day, but up until then had a normal development. And she was seizure-free. A few weeks afterwards, they started seeing kind of cognitive recovery. This is maybe 2 years ago now, and I got some updates recently, and she's going to normal school. She is developing normally, and she went from this disastrous situation with so many seizures a day to really be functioning much better. And it really makes me proud of the people I work with and the teamwork we do. It's really challenging, but it's also very rewarding.
Thank you for giving us a little glimpse into your life. Do you spend more time in epilepsy or pediatric neurosurgery?
For the moment, it's mostly pediatric neurosurgery. It's pretty much full-time for me at the moment. For the last years, I've been the one responsible of epilepsy surgery in Karolinska for both pediatrics and adults. And it's nice because we've been able to get a good synergy between our adult and pediatric teams, and we can get a good transitions for the patients who are kids and eventually go into adult world, as well as a good discussion and very fruitful discussions when we can engage both teams.
Thank you for telling our viewers and listeners that a multidisciplinary approach is absolutely essential when we are managing patients with epilepsy. That is something which I have experienced in my own life when I was working in a medical oncology team, and we used to have tumor board rounds every week. So when we are discussing a given patient, the medical oncologist, radiation oncologist, the pathologist, and the neuroradiologist, all of them will discuss that patient's case through their perspective and then come up with a common, mutually agreed upon treatment plan. I believe that is true in epilepsy surgery also.
It is definitely, and in pediatric neurosurgery. And I think the more tools we have, the more we know about diseases, health, and especially the brain, the more important becomes to actually do this multidisciplinary and have a good discussion about all the aspects of what we do.
Now, let's take a deeper dive into what a typical day looks like for you when you're working at Karolinska University Hospital. I ask because our listeners are always fascinated about what the workday of a top notch professional like you looks like.
I have scheduled surgeries Monday and Thursday, and that would mean maybe one longer procedure like a tumor or two shorter procedures. You could have somebody with a crowded neck, like a Chiari malformation, together with somebody who needs to do a endoscopy where you look into the brain with a camera. Tuesdays, I have a clinic, and after morning rounds, I have one patient every 30 minutes until the afternoon. That day, we also have our X-ray rounds together with neurologists, another multidisciplinary round where we discuss complex patients that need attention from both of our specialities. On Wednesdays, we have our tumor rounds together, just like you said, together with the eye doctors, the pathologists, the radiation oncologist, the oncologist, and our neuroradiologist. And we also have often participation from other centers in Sweden and sometimes from abroad. And in the afternoon, on Wednesdays, I usually also have time to meet up with families who need to get reports or diagnosis back after surgery. And that means giving them information about what kind of tumor we have found and the follow-up treatment plan. And we often do that together with the oncologists in order to get a good handover from the neurosurgical side to the oncology. Apart from this, we also get a lot of emergency referrals. That might be a prematurely born child who's got a hemorrhage, bleeding in the brain, who needs to be evaluated, or sometimes we need to puncture the fontanelle in order to get out some blood and remove the pressure. And also we get some emergency cases that we sometimes need to operate on. And I try to schedule them, if possible, semi-acutely on Wednesdays and Fridays. So the days tend to fill up a lot, and we also sometimes need to back up the on-call line when they get pediatric questions.
Thank you for sharing that. When we were talking about you coming on the show, you had mentioned that your clinical work had raised ethical questions. Questions so profound that after 10 years as a neurosurgeon, you returned to university to study philosophy. That remarkable decision would have obviously been in response to an incident that led you in a different direction. Since I am a fiction author, I am going to draw upon a principle related to storycraft. It is called the inciting incident. In the beginning of a story, we meet the main character or the protagonist. They are going about their day to day life without realizing that the universe has a surprise waiting for them around the corner. When that surprise arrives, it disrupts the protagonist's status quo and presents a call to adventure. This event is the inciting incident. And if the protagonist accepts the call to adventure, they get catapulted along a path they would have never imagined for themselves. An example of an inciting incident is when Hagrid bursts into Harry Potter's 11th birthday, announces that Harry is a wizard, and has been invited to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. This inciting incident uprooted Harry's life and propelled him into a unique new world filled with magic, adventure, and danger. So, just like Harry faced an inciting incident in the fictional realm, Ulrika, what was the inciting incident or set of incidents that deflected your life towards studying philosophy?
As you know, when you are on call in your surgery, you get every on call, you get a lot of questions, you get a lot of cases. We need to decide on, are we going to operate? Are we going to admit this? Is it too late? Is this a desolate case? What's right? What's wrong? Afterwards, you really know whether you really made the right decision. I mean, most of the decisions do have scientific backup and do have clinical evidence to back up or experience to back up. But sometimes there are these gray areas that are difficult to know what's right in a given situation. We can have an adult who's led a good life, who's who's getting a stroke, who gets a big hemorrhage, and you might be able to save their life, but um, to what quality of life and to what cost for the patient and for the family. And I started thinking a lot about this. What's a life worth living? You can live without a limb, you can live hemiplegic, you can live in a wheelchair and have good quality of life. But I found it more and more difficult to try to decide on what would be an outcome that would be acceptable for the patient. So it all boiled down to the question, what's a life worth living? And I really think that the tipping point was when we admitted in a young girl. She was a refugee from a very poor country in Africa, and she had a wonderful mother who had kept this girl alive. She was born with a big tumor that's been there probably ever since she was born. It had made her severely handicapped with hearing impairment. She was blind, and they came to Sweden as refugees. And when you come to Sweden, you go straight away to the emergency room. So she came from a refugee camp in Africa to Karolinska emergency room. So they really were rushed into this kind of space age environment, and were taken care of just the way we would take care of a patient, a Swedish patient, with this a radiological image and this clinical finding. We rarely treat patients who've got a disease that's proceeded so far, that's already caused so much symptoms, because patients come to our knowledge way before. And there was a lot of multidisciplinary rounds. There's a lot of people involved. We did everything in our power, and she got a lot of operations and gained a little bit function. Eventually, I ended up thinking that we might have overdone. We might have caused her too many procedures. Were we doing the right thing? And I still think that the medical management was correct, but I was very worried about the my own ethical compass in this situation. Were we looking for a good X-ray image, or were we looking for a good quality of life? I think we were looking for a good quality of life. It really made me question my own view on what's a life worth living. So that's why I enrolled on to become a philosophy student, taking evening classes at Stockholm University. It helped me see different ways to approach ethical problems, and kind of helped me structuralize my own thinking. I can't say that it made my medical judgment different, but it helped me get a vocabulary for how to think ethically. And, if you're a doctor, if you've been doing science, you want clear-cut flow charts, you want to be able to make pro cons. And all of a sudden, you're thrown into the world of philosophy, where things are discussed in a different way. Sometimes it felt like just discussing these philosophical terms or discussing different theories was like trying to chase a bar of soap in a shower. It just slipped out of your hand. And it was really mentally challenging, and also or intellectually challenging. And it was really, really rewarding. It just kind of really made me realize that it's okay to think about ethical issues as something that's very complex, something that's very difficult, and how we should be humble in front of difficult ethical challenges, because we face them all the time. Like in this case of the refugee girl, that we might have been able to do equally much by doing less amount of surgery or doing less amount of treatments.
What is a life worth living? That's a question that all of us as physicians and as surgeons we grapple with during our professional careers. But in your case, you have taken that to a next level and given yourself the tools to understand and to work through ethical implications of modern medicine. Now, you are a member of the ethics boards of the Swedish Medical Society and the European Society for Neurological Surgeons. Will you tell us what these boards do and whom they serve? Please give our listeners and viewers a glimpse into real ethical dilemmas faced in the world of medicine and how you overcome them.
The Swedish Medical Society's um, ethical board is a board that serves the community of doctors in Sweden. And we are a group that are comprised of anesthesiologists. It's me. We have a forensic psychiatrist. We have a gynecologist who's very experienced in different kind of assault situations. We have general practitioners and a general surgeon, and we do a lot of administrative work where we review proposals from the World Medical Association. We look at different proposals from the Swedish Board of Health and Welfare. Now, currently, we've been working quite a lot about people who are cognitively impaired or who have different psychiatric illnesses, and how we should help them when they're in a situation where they need to undergo treatments but refuse, or if they're in a situation where they can't understand what's best for themselves. Somebody who's had a trauma to their head might have swelling in the head. They can't make any informed decisions, but still need to get medical help with the drains. They try to pull out the drains from their skull or refuse to accept treatment, and the ethical boundaries, because we have a legal framework and we have a practical framework. So that's been one of the main questions. We also recently conducted a review regarding assisted suicide. It's obviously a big question in Canada and many European countries, and we wanted to see our community's opinions about this, because it's a complex question, and we should own the question rather than wait for politicians to start trying to legalize or put a framework that's not accepted among the physicians. So we have some very huge practical questions that we work with. So it's very severe and difficult questions and some very practical questions. And the European board is for the European Association for Neurological Surgeons, where we have written some framework for ethical code of conduct, as well as identified some core areas that we want to work with, which is how do we conduct neurosurgery in developing countries in an ethical way? What are the challenges? What are the potential problems? What are the potential problems with AI? How can we benefit from AI but still do it in an ethical way? And then, of course, these core questions that are in medical ethics always, with autonomy, integrity, the sanctity of life, and how to help our members navigate very difficult terrain that neurosurgery is.
Ulrika, in your opinion, is there enough emphasis on medical ethics when young doctors, either medical students or residents, are being trained?
I think that at least in Sweden, we had a course of formal training quite early in medical school. And during the residency, we have a European course that spans over 4 years and a Scandinavian course that spans over 4 years. And there is some aspects of ethics in it. So, but there could definitely be more ethics. I think the most important thing is to get an ethical framework internalized in every resident's mindset. And this is really our responsibility. What's best for the patient? Is this reasonable? Am I giving the patient informed consent? And also challenge ourselves with the question, am I making the decision for the right reason? I think that becoming a doctor is an apprenticeship, and we should really treat our junior colleagues, and we should support them in this very difficult decision making. When I did my residency, my senior colleagues told me that you can teach a monkey to operate the brain, you can teach a monkey to do neurosurgery, but you never teach judgment. And I think this is very correct, that the judgment is the very difficult thing, and the judgment is about ethics.
When I was doing my neurosurgical training, one of our professors also used to say the very same thing, that you can teach a monkey how to operate. So, is this something that neurosurgeons all over the world talk about?
Probably. And I think that's something that, even though we have different cultures, it all boils down to the same core ethical questions, and they're difficult.
Let's switch gears a little bit and take you out of Sweden to West Africa. When I was preparing for our talk, I did some digging into the neurosurgical services in West Africa. To my surprise, there is a vast divide between West Africa and Sweden, where you work. While there is only one neurosurgeon per 1.7 million people in West Africa, there is one neurosurgeon per 70,000 people in Sweden. That's approximately 24 times the density of West Africa. I'm quoting these stats to introduce your next remarkable venture to our viewers and listeners, the Swedish West African Neurosurgery Collaboration, or SANC. You were involved in establishing SANC and now train neurosurgeons in Ghana and Sierra Leone. Tell us the origin story of SANC. How did you first become aware of the desperate shortage of neurosurgeons in West Africa? And what made you decide that this was your fight to take on?
Um, there's been a few very good publications about the amount of neurosurgeons worldwide, and you can see that it's a very globally unfair specialty. There's a lot of neurosurgeons in Europe. In Japan, neurosurgery is overcrowded. And when you come to Africa, and especially Sub-Saharan Africa, there's very few neurosurgeons. So this is a huge global injustice. And at the same time, these countries have a very young population and quite a lot of illnesses. So this was a kind of thing that has been resonating within me for many years. And I'm good friends with a few colleagues who West African surgeons, one of them Professor Uche in Enugu, Nigeria. And as things usually go, there was no formal invitation. They started talking about this. Wouldn't it be great if you could help us start out neurosurgery? And especially in the case of Nigeria, they wanted to have an operation microscope, because that would really transfer their neurosurgery from 1960s to what it is today. So they started discussing this. And after that, my friends Magnus and Mats sent out an email to colleagues in Sweden, and why don't we start the initiative? Why don't we start Swedish African Neurosurgery collaborations? So we had a meeting in Stockholm, and we decided to start this organization. We didn't have any funding, but we decided that ask some medical companies if they could sponsor us to at least transport some stuff to Nigeria. And eventually 2000, I can't remember now whether it's 2018 or 2019, we had our first mission to Nigeria. And on that mission, we were able to bring in a operation microscope that was donated by academic hospital in Uppsala. And eventually we went on to get connections into Ghana, which was my first mission, and that was 2019. And eventually, since then, I think we've done 8 missions: Nigeria, Ghana. Me and our president, Magnus Tisell, went on this surgical outreach to Sierra Leone. That was 2 years ago. And just recently, one mission was conducted in Liberia. And this is, of course, something we do cautiously, mostly because it can never be a tourism for Western European neurosurgeons to go there and do cool stuff. It always has to be on the conditions of the local neurosurgeons. What are their needs? What do you need? If we come there and help you, how will you maintain the knowledge? How will you proceed? How will this help you in the long run? And I think this has worked well. We're not white saviors and who go there and fix stuff for them. It's on their terms. And actually, Professor Ucha has, together with us, published some scientific papers from our collaboration that's shown how they've increased their volumes. And we can see that they've got less complications. So this is a question about collaboration on their terms. I think that we can in that way help teach, but also make it in a responsible, ethical way.
When you travel to Sierra Leone and Ghana to teach neurosurgery and to provide assistance and help to the local neurosurgeons, what have those experiences taught you? Things that you simply could not have learned back home in Stockholm.
Um, they have taught me an awful lot. They actually taught me more than I had expected. I'd expected to see how it is to work in a completely different environment, how it is to work with limited equipment. But what I also realized is how crucial it is to have the whole chain of skills and knowledge for the whole team. And that goes for the anesthesia, that goes for nurses, of course, but also in the post-operative care. How vital it is to have good nurses who understand the signs that they need to react on, how important it is to have good physiotherapy to get the patients, especially kids with neck tumors, out of the bed, get them mobilized and understanding. It's not just a matter of giving somebody a paper with rules. You really, really see how important it is for people to understand what they're doing and why we are doing. Also, I've been so deeply touched and impressed by the dedication of these few but so extremely hardworking neurosurgical colleagues that I've been meeting in Ghana when they come to visit us in Sweden from Nigeria and Sierra Leone. Now there's two neurosurgical trainees, one in Venezuela and one in Morocco, who are aiming to go back to their home country, Sierra Leone, and to pursue neurosurgery because that country doesn't have a single neurosurgeon. So that's a huge undertaking on their behalf, and they work so extremely hard. And it's good to be able to provide them with a little bit of support and some help along the way.
Thank you for sharing that deeply moving and personal story with us. And now we have come to the part of the talk that I am most fascinated about. Your trip to Antarctica as the expedition medical officer. What was it like? What did you do there? I have never met anyone who goes to Antarctica and live to tell. So, what kind of medical emergencies did you face, and how did you attend to those given the limited resources? Tell us some stories about your adventures in Antarctica.
When you go on a polar expedition like that to Antarctica, my aim was to be unemployed. I didn't want to have any doctor stuff to do during the whole expedition, and we achieved it pretty well because obviously you are very far away from anything. We got Starlink, but we don't have mobile phones. I took care of the Swedish and Finnish station, which meant that you're not able to do anything advanced medically. You don't have a nurse. You have instruments, but you can't really do an operation. If something serious would happen, you have an evacuation. Your timeline for evacuation is probably 3 days, and you don't know whether your patient will be evacuated to South Africa, Australia, or South America, which means that 90% is prevention, 5% is early detection, and the rest is treatment. And so everyday work was fortunately quite boring. We slept in bunk beds. We got up at 7 a.m., had our coffee, had morning meeting. We spoke through the day. Who's doing what risks are involved? Do you need any help? Are you feeling okay? And when people went out on their field trips, I provided them with kits of medication they might need. There being midnight sun, we had some cases of sleeping problems, and we had some cases of bad weather, but we had no major incidents. And I've got so many so many great stories from Antarctica, but something that stuck with me is a very, very beautiful memory was when me and Peter, the mechanic, we had to go and get a container with one of those track vehicles, and that container was 125 kilometers away, and we knew that this would take us probably 15 to 24 hours because you only drive 20 kilometers an hour with the tracked vehicle, and the container weighs a lot. So we ended up going there, and we talked about downloading a heap of podcasts, true crime. That would be great. Eventually, when we sat down in the tracked vehicle, we realized we didn't have any Bluetooth. We weren't able to play any of our music or any of our podcasts. So pretty new to each other, we just sat there and talked to each other for 15 hours. And after a while, we got in the situation where the weather changed, and we got a whiteout. And whiteout means that there's a really, really dense fog. You can't see anything. You can't. Everything just turns white. And we were driving on this secured route. We were driving with GPS, and after a while, we realized that, if we look at this complete whiteout, we'll just start hallucinating. So we pulled the curtains, and we had just the curtains in front of us. We were driving by the GPS, and we sat there and drove hours and hours on end until we reached our container. We touched that one, we turned back and drove back. And I just remember that as something so beautiful, because eventually the fog disappeared, and we got a bit of sunshine, and we could just see this beautiful vast landscape. And I can't say that we were in a place where nobody had ever been before, but we were in a situation where very few people had been before, and we were driving this big vehicle and just talking, and eventually coming back and seeing these wonderful people we're staying with, and they were cheering, and we got hot tea and sandwiches, and came back actually in 15 hours, which was faster than predicted. I have many that kind of beautiful memories just from doing stuff. And from it being very uneventful, it would have also been very sad to see, most of all, sad to see anybody of my wonderful friends being hurt, and to have their project spoiled or affected by this, because this was the first part of a big 5-year project. This is the biggest Antarctic project for Sweden ever, and we were working together with researchers from Danish Meteorological Institute and Germany. So it's I think it was medically very uneventful, but I was mostly working as a field technician, and it was hard work, hard physical work, a lot of fun, and it was just being on that continent is so mind-blowing, especially in these times where we have a very restless world. There's a lot of conflicts, wars going on, and you are actually on a continent that feels like John Lennon's Imagine. There's no possession, there's no military, there's no nuclear weapons, there are no borders, there are no police. There's just a lot of stations that help each other out, and a bunch of people who, if you look at it, live really crammed in quite small conditions. We had to stay indoors for days because of storms, and we had to ration the water, so we weren't able to shower. And you could think that people got grumpy and angry, but no, it was just a beautiful community, and I was so honored and so happy to be there.
During this trip to Antarctica, you expanded your worldview, got a glimpse of how humanity can function in a different set of conditions. and also had a lot of fun. So I'm wondering if you get the chance to go back to Antarctica, will you do that?
Definitely. I hope that I will get the opportunity, and I'm forever grateful that my boss allowed me to take the leave of absence and to go on this. And I do think that it's good, especially as a private person, it's very good to uh, be able to get a change and get another view on the world and get this wonderful experience. But I think also to get a break from being a neurosurgeon, get a break from the everyday work, and to get time to reflect on what you're doing and how you're doing and what's important. And it's kind of it's good to get a reality check.
I completely appreciate that point of view. When we made initial contact, you had told me that your life philosophy is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, pushing your limits, and balancing grit with curiosity. And you're clearly living out these values through your multiple adventures across the globe. Ulrika, you had also told me about your grandfather who served in two wars against the former Soviet Union and remained curious and optimistic despite all the hardships that he faced. Will you tell us a bit more about this remarkable man and how his life shaped who you are today?
When I grew up on the farm in Ostrobotnia, we shared the house. The house had two apartments, and the adjacent apartment was where my grandmother and grandfather lived. So they were kind of a very, very close part of our family. And um, as a kid, I never understood what he had really gone through. And all I knew that he met up with his friends, and they always sat down and looked at documentaries about the war, or they once a month they went and had lunch and they talked about war. And I can understand why did they have to talk about the war over and over again. But eventually now, especially when coming across a PhD thesis in medical history. There was a thesis done on the PTSD or supposed PTSD in Finnish war veterans from the Soviet wars. And when reading that, I could realize that back then there was no label of post traumatic stress syndrome, and there was no formal therapy. There's a lot of people who ended up with alcohol abuse or ended up on in mental institutions. And also, knowing from where I grew up, I could see that there were a lot of people who ended up being bitter and angry and feeling sorry for themselves. And I always found it fascinating how my grandfather, he could tell stories about the war. He was never romanticizing anything. He wasn't saying that this was something that made him a man. It was nothing uh, brave or glorious. Obviously, it was very brave, but he was never romanticizing or glorifying it. He said that I don't want to think about the bad stuff. I made some great friends, and that's very important. That you always surround yourself with good people. The older I gotten, and the more I read about the Finnish wars, and especially with the PTSD of that era, I come to realize that that was his therapy. His friends were his therapy. When they were sent home from the war, they shared the railway carriage all the way from Korea back to Ostrobotnia, and they met up and they talked about war several times a month. They had their monthly lunch, and when one of their war veterans or one of their friends died, the other veterans would carry his casket in a procession. There would be a specific type of coffin that they would carry to a specific hymn. Over the years, I saw how the people carrying the coffin were getting thinner and older, and eventually, the last funeral I saw, there was only one person. He was one person left, and he was too weak to carry a coffin. The fact that he was able to maintain such optimistic view, and he was always very curious. 1985, when he finally received a compensation for the war, financial compensation, he went out and bought a video camera. This was on a bed of time, and it obviously costed a lot. But he started recording everything. So he recorded our childhood. He made these homemade music videos where he would put the video camera on his dashboard in his car and drive around and play Finnish accordion music and describe the different villages. And he recorded a lot of our childhood as well, and eventually started taping both cartoons, but especially David Attenborough documentaries for me and my sister. And we could watch these nature programs together. And he would he built a playhouse for me and my sister and started building small houses in the woods. Then he started getting wind turbines in order to get electricity and this 12-volt system. And he made a small water turbine. And he was just so curious and so forward and so interested. And he used to say that he would have loved to study if he would have been given the opportunity. And that's always been there in the back of my head, that I want to be like him in regards to the curiosity, in regards to the not to be stuck in negative thinking. And it's he was a remarkable man, and I kind of hope to be able to bring forward his legacy.
Interestingly, my grandfather also has had a very profound impact on my life. In fact, my grandparents were the one who brought me up, so they were my real parents. And my grandfather was the one who taught me how to be optimistic, how to face adversity without getting defeated, and how to strive for excellence. So I believe the same story is reflected in your case.
Yeah. And I think it's also very interesting to have this kind of close connection to my parents on my both maternal and paternal side, and had their insights, and also had those stories from the war and reflections from the war that I hope we never have to experience.
That's so true. And they tend to have more wisdom than one's parents. Ulrika, you are clearly someone who is always in motion, operating, teaching, serving on ethics boards, traveling to West Africa and Antarctica. I'm wondering, what do you do for leisure to balance this extraordinary work life?
I think that it's important to get balance in life, and the balance has to be in many different areas. I mean, obviously, we work a lot. We have a lot of intellectual challenges, but there is always this need of creativity that needs to be felt. There's the need of culture, need of being physically active. So I think that I try to think of my life as a circle that has got 4 areas where I need to balance work with being physically active. I've found a training community where I've got great friends who are working completely different areas. They're completely uninterested of what I do at work, how much I publish academically, and we just meet up and we have fun. And that's made me meet people that are police officers, firefighters. One of my best friends is a warden, and the other one is a preschool principal. And I'm married to a lawyer. He's a judge at a district court, and he's got pretty much similar job as I have. And it's just great to go there, and we have fun with our friends. We get physically exhausted and have nice meals afterwards. And then the creativity, I think there's obviously neurosurgery is not a field of creativity. You are quite restricted by anatomy and by what's feasible to do. So I just started collecting silk and textiles that I dye with natural fabrics, food remnants, pieces of flowers, and in that way I kind of get a close circle of textiles that would have been thrown away that I can transform into something new. And I got a little company that's the company's description is medical insurance consultancy and textile art. So I balance the company with that. It's nothing I make money out of. I just do it for fun. Of course, getting the kind of stories from culture, from movies, from concerts, music. It's I think that during residency you live on just working a lot. I did my PhD and my residency at the same time, and I'm happy I did it. Those years were followed by years where I could do other stuff. That balance, I think, that hopefully can make me a bit more insightful and a better person, and that give me energy to be the best version of me at work.
Talking about work, if you could change one thing about how neurosurgery is practiced or how it is taught, what would it be? I ask this with particular interest because very few neurosurgeons in the world have had the breadth of your global experience.
It's a very interesting question because I don't see myself as somebody who's got particularly big experience or who's got a big variety in my view. But I think that it's very, very important that we uh, maintain the integrity in our profession. I think it's very important that we allow us to accept that neurosurgery is difficult, that we need to understand neurophysiology, we need to understand neuroanatomy, we need to understand what we do with surgery, we need to have ethical decision making. And I am very much afraid of us being in a situation where we become the brain mechanics, as we talked about earlier, where we are asked to do surgeries without us being involved in the decision making. I can see that happen in some countries, and that being motivated by, well, we have a good team of neurologists or epileptologists who say that this needs to be done. I think that the one who is holding the scalpel, the one who's making the incision, has to be convinced about this being the best possible treatment or best possible procedure, and also be a person who's able to take care of the complications that arise, and to be taking care of the patients and the families when complications arise. With the better diagnostics, better radiology, AI, it becomes even more demanding. I recently saw one of those popular science newspapers flying around that had depicted a robot as a neurosurgeon, and this is your future brain surgeon. Yes, AI robots can do a lot of good things, but I think that this is too complicated to be performed by AI or robots. Another old saying, just because you can do the operation doesn't mean that you should be doing the operation. I think that the more tools we have, the more things we find, the more responsibility we have to balance the pros and cons in each situation.
Ulrika, what legacy do you want to leave for your students, for the neurosurgical community, and for the field of medical ethics? How do you want to be remembered once you retire?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. Uh, I was doing an observership in London many years ago, and I was really impressed by the way the Brits were talking about. I was trained by Mr. So and so, because that really meant that they had been working with that particular doctor for a long time, and that they took pride in what they had learned from Mr. So and so. And I would like to be one of those people. Maybe that's quite vain to say, but I would like to be one of those people. I was trained by Mrs. Sandvik. She always taught me to think about things like this. So she always uh, taught me right and wrong, and integrity, and do no harm. And I think that I would like to be remembered as a good person and as a good teacher. Um, that would be very important, more important than having a tool named after me, or a procedure, a big split your skull, Sandvik way.
Thank you for that. Finally, Ulrika, starting in a small Finnish farm to the operating rooms of Sweden, and from the heat and humidity of West Africa to the icy landscapes of Antarctica. What is the one key insight you would like to share with medical students and young doctors who are just beginning their careers? Please give us one pearl of wisdom.
Don't get too focused on an idea. This is a hike. This is a long journey, and there's ups and downs and hills, and you have to cross some rivers. And if you stray away from your path, don't worry, because eventually you'll find back to the path or to another path. And as long as you just keep on walking, you'll get there. You'll get somewhere, and it's going to be good.
Ulrika, I had a great time getting to know you and the exemplary work that you're doing. Many thanks for coming on the Oath and Staff podcast, sharing your thoughts, and inspiring those who have tuned in. We wish you all the best for advancing your legacy of service and excellence as a surgeon, teacher, and an adventurer.
Thank you so much.
And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Ulrika Sandvik and also found it informative. Thanks for tuning in and subscribe for more.